Welcome back to the Winter Growers Podcast. Today on the show, I speak with Maine farmers Nate Drummond and Gabrielle Gosselin of Six River Farm located in Bodenham, just north of Portland, Maine. As early apprentices of Paul and Sandy Arnold of Pleasant Valley Farm, also former guests on the show, Nate and Gabrielle are now in their 18th year of farming. Starting Six River Farm in 2007 on 2.5 acres of leased land and utilizing a collective farm model with 4 farms sharing infrastructure, they now have grown to 25 acres in vegetable production with 20 employees during the main season, 10 of whom work year-round. Currently farming on a mix of leased and owned land, they use 11 high tunnels and 11 cat tunnels for their year-round production. Supplying a self-serve farm stand that's set up in one of their greenhouses, year-round farmers markets, and some direct wholesale to natural food stores, they are a beloved farm in southern Maine. As a family with 2 young kids, they prioritize a healthy work-life balance by taking time away from the farm to travel and visit other farms too. Nate and Gabrielle offer a tremendous amount of experience and wisdom, and they are an inspiring example of 4-season farming done well in Maine. This episode of the Winter Growers Podcast is brought to you by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are designed and built in Italy, where small-scale farming has been a way of life for generations. Discover the beauty of BCS on your farm with PTO-driven implements for soil working, shredding cover crops, spreading compost, mowing under fences, clearing snow, and more. All powered by a single gear-driven machine that's tailored to the size and scale of your operation. Tractors and attachments are on sale now. Find sale pricing and your nearest dealer at bcsamerica.com. That's bcsamerica.com.
Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. So our work has always been about keeping farming information as free and open to the public as we possibly can, and that won't change. One way in which we make that possible, though, is through advertising on podcasts like this, on our YouTube channel, on our forum, and so on. So if you are a small farm-related company selling seeds or tools or something growers could use, or if you're an organization putting on some conference or offering a grant or looking for farmer contributors or something else farm-related that I'm not thinking of, get in touch with us at farmermichelle@notillgrowers.com. That's farmermichelle@notillgrowers.com. Supporting us helps to grow this work and grow farmers. So we all thank you. Again, that email is farmermichelle@notillgrowers.com, or you can find our contact information at notillgrowers.com. All right. Thanks, y'all. Enjoy the show.
Okay, welcome to the Winter Growers Podcast. Today I have Nate and Gabrielle of Six River Farm in Bodenham, Maine. And I'm very excited to have more Mainers on the podcast, especially a farm that, let's see, I think you're in your 18th season now. So who's been farming for quite a while, started off small, has grown quite a bit, but still, to me, from what I've seen in social media, you've kept and maintained this sort of, small scale family farm feel, which is so great considering, how many acres you're actually farming, especially here in Maine. So I'm very excited to have you on the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks. A pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So we are here in January. I love to record this podcast in the winter since, we're talking about winter farming or year-round growing. And Maine, in my opinion, is always a little challenging in January. You've got mostly the darkest time of year. The weather is super unpredictable. It just has that kind of like waiting to start sort of feel, like we're just sort of in this limbo and we're wanting to start, but you can't really influence much around the weather. So I'm wondering for you guys, how do you feel in January? How does it affect your mood and mind space?
Well, it's a mix. I think actually sometimes January feels like still that pleasant little window where, again, because as you said, we are starting to still waiting to really start, that it's a little bit mellower and a little bit more like 100% focus on farm planning and sort of the office side of things, which after the, sort of the busyness and the hustle bustle of the harvest in late fall sort of feels like a little bit of a relief. So I think that that's how it's feeling to me, at least.
For me, it's a different winter, actually, because the first year that both of our children are in elementary school.
Congrats.
Thanks. So our daughter, Alice, is 9, and our son, Quincy, is about to turn 6. And having them both in school full time changes my winter quite a bit. So it's been exciting for me to be able to just to focus more on some of the winter planning and to have more full in-depth conversations with Nate as we map things out and think about things more critically together without as much distraction has been really exciting, especially because the kids love school. So that feels good too.
Yeah, no, having the extra space and time definitely makes a huge difference. So I can appreciate that. I'm curious though, as a year-round farmer, obviously there is the generally weekly, biweekly harvest that goes on, as opposed to someone who is, not actively growing in the winter. And one of the benefits that I found, even though it was the continuation of, that active work, and oftentimes you really wanted to have a rest, but I did find there was something very rejuvenating about getting my hands in the soil, about, being sort of in that eternal spring environment of a high tunnel in particular, and getting the green and smelling the smells. Do you find that has an effect on your mood? Do you feel like it can be frustrating to have to, get back out there and harvest, or are you excited to have that as a part of your routine?
I'd say that we should make it pretty clear that we have amazing year-round employees. And so by and large, they are doing all of the weekly winter harvest wash and pack and deliveries to grocery stores that we sell to and the main market that we do on Saturdays. Like our employees are all managing that. So we do go into the tunnels and do a weekly walk with our high tunnel manager and our winter farm manager. But, I'm harvesting herbs or, we'll join in as needed, but really they are so fabulous and hardworking and focused that they're able to get it all done without us. So I could say we can't really take credit to, having to manage the that side of thing or how that is balanced. We feel really lucky to have found a balance with the people that work with us.
Yes, that has been a big part of, I think, over the years, developing for us the 4-season farm and having it feel sustainable on a personal level, which is exactly that of being able to delegate a chunk of what's happening in the winter to other people, and then being able to step back and have a little bit more downtime. The farm feels a little bit smaller and simpler in the winter, even though obviously winter growing comes with all of its own challenges. And so it's a little bit easier to pass it off to some good long-term folks and feel like we can do that. So that has worked well. But it is also nice still to step in. I mean, I completely agree that sort of eternal spring feeling, or like stepping in a high tunnel on a day like today, which is sunny and about 20, and then, being able to just feel the warmth as you step into that high tunnel and the sort of humid, earthy smell. I mean, I think it is something that we still appreciate and enjoy those opportunities. And sometimes it almost feels funny because there'll be times where, again, folks who are working on the winter crew are busy out there harvesting and will sort of take the advantage of our slightly more relaxed schedule and like join them for an hour and just like help with something, because it is such a pleasant space to be in on these, particularly the sunny winter days.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate being able to enjoy the highlights, we'll say, of that work, because, no one wants to have those eternally cold, frigid hands harvesting pound after pound of spinach. So you get to have you dip your toe in a little bit more, which sounds like you've earned it too, right? So this is your 18th year, correct? Is that right?
Yes.
That's amazing. I'd love to sort of rewind a little bit and go back to where it all began. I first heard of you, both of you, through Paul and Sandy Arnold, of course, and who were guests last year on the podcast. And I'd love to hear in your words, how you got started, how you met, how you got the farming bug, I guess.
Nate and I met as undergrads in college. Neither of us studied anything ag related whatsoever, but we, over the course of our 4 years in college, we became interested in just, sort of switching a little bit from academics to working outside, not necessarily with a thought that it would be a long-term or career-oriented plan. But so after graduation, we worked for one fall at Sewell's Orchard in Lincolnville, which was great, just harvesting apples and pressing cider. And that was really wonderful. And then we moved down to New York City, again, more just to check that out. And when we were there and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do while we were living there, a friend asked me what made me really happy in New York. And I said, the farmers markets. And she was like, well, why don't you work at the farmers markets? So with her encouragement, I just asked some farms if I could work for them. And I ended up working for 2 farms for 2 years that we lived there. And sometimes Nate would join me on the weekends, and he had a job doing academic research. And I think, not to speak for you, but that you were ready to do something more hands-on and outdoors. So after our time in New York, we went to apprentice on Paul and Sandy's farm, Pleasant Valley Farm up in Argyle. And that was really our beginning. So I had some marketing experience before that, but that was our beginning of our time learning about production. And so we worked there for a full season, not an entire year. They weren't doing a ton of winter growing at the time. But we started in March and worked till Thanksgiving, I think.
And that was what year? So what year was that?
That would have been 2006.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and it was a very, as very good apprenticeships are, it was a very all sort of consuming, all encompassing experience working with them. And I think what one thing that was particularly beneficial for us, and credit to Paul and Sandy, who sort of, I think themselves had started their farm sort of by a lot of trial and error and not necessarily through any formal programs or whatnot. They really encouraged us towards the end of our time working with them to just go out and do it. Like we were talking about, well, should we work for another farm? Should we try and manage a farm? And they were really encouraging of us just to, if we had the ability and we could find a place to start, to just jump right into it. And they were also very happy, obviously to share a lot of what they were doing and sort of encouraged us and to sort of feel free to more or less copy what they were doing and bring it with us. And so as we were winding up our time working with them, we started looking for opportunities, places that we could start, and with the idea of initially, some place that we might be able to lease a little bit of land on a short-term basis, just to get our feet wet and see if we really did like it. And so we were, lucky to find a property here in Bodenham that had, I think initially we leased 9 acres of some very high quality farmland right along Merrimack Bay. And it had, the landlord also had some space in a barn that we could use as well. And so that was sort of how we ended up. And I think we bought a little cultivating tractor at Paul and Sandy had one of their, hosted one of their many farm conferences in the fall of that year. And some farmer from Wisconsin brought a bunch of equipment over. And so we bought a little cultivating tractor, and we bought a little market van from another neighbor of Paul and Sandy's. And so, we took, I think at the time they were still making these little sort of caterpillar tunnels made out of PVC that they would sort of PVC and duct tape essentially. So we
did that.
We bought some PVC and some duct tape. And yeah, we sort of, I think a lot of what we started out with in terms, even down to varieties and like spacing and bed systems, was sort of very much just, blatantly copied from Paul and Sandy, but, that had real value. We were able to take what they had spent, years sort of refining and just sort of start in right where they were. And obviously over the years, we've made different changes that have worked with, sort of our ground and our, sort of preferences and conditions and whatnot. But I think being able to sort of have this sort of template worked great. Although I will say that the first of the PVC and duct tape field houses blew over in a storm like mid-April of the first season. So I think one thing we realized, which was very relevant for winter growing, is that, or for tunnels in general, is that beautiful location that we found on Mayor Meeting Bay was also significantly more windy than Paul and Sandy's farm. And so some of what they maybe had been doing in terms of these very basic caterpillar tunnels and row covers and stuff like that, we were not quite able to emulate, and we had to invest in a little bit more rigid and rugged options. But yeah, so we started here in 2007, and the farm has sort of grown incrementally over time. I think at one point there was a point a couple years in where we started to look for other land to maybe relocate to, when we realized that we did want to continue farming, and it felt like being in this part of Maine was a good place to be. And ultimately, we sort of, the more we looked elsewhere, the more we realized that what we had in place here in Bodenham was really pretty close to ideal for us, both in terms of the soil and the location vis-a-vis local markets and the community. And so we sort of ultimately decided to try and cobble together a farm with all the relevant pieces here in Bodenham, opposed to find something that was already existing elsewhere. And that sort of has taken the form of incrementally, not just having farm grow and production, but finding different parcels in the neighborhood to lease and buy, finding a house in the neighborhood to buy, building out some of our own infrastructure, and securing different leases and 10-year arrangements that maybe at first were short term, and making those sort of longer term. So
from my recollection, the land that you leased and purchased has a very unique setup because you share with other farm operations. Can you describe a little bit how that came about and what that looks like, if you want?
Our farmland setup is a little complicated. So what we call our main field, which is our biggest field, where we started, we began by just leasing it. We were actually subleasing it, and at the time didn't even meet the landowners, and just worked through the fellow leasing from them. And then the landowner owned a larger parcel that a number of farms ended up leasing, and he put it up for sale, but under an easement. So we purchased that collectively, became an LLC. So we now, we own it collectively.
And with how many other farms or farmers? What does that look like?
I think right now we're one of 4 sort of members of that landowning sort of LLC. And we do, I mean, it's, you're right. Sort of when we started, we were sort of, there was this group of sort of new young farmers who were all starting on some of this land in Bodenham about the same time. So we were all sort of initially leasing from the same fellow George, and then also had this shared wash pack facility. And as things go, like that group has ebbed and flowed over time. So, there have been some sort of our neighbors who people started at different times. Some people have stopped and transitioned. Honestly, I think as it probably did for a lot of people, COVID resulted in less, I think, people's businesses not being viable and more a period of like forced reflection for people. And so there were a couple of our neighboring farms who were farming some of the fields in our area and were part of this sort of farm cluster using the same infrastructure, who sort of paused or stopped or reconfigured their farms in that like 2020, 2021 window. So yeah, I think some of that collective sort of use has shifted as of the last 3 or 4 years. And we're actually in the process of finally leaving this rented barn space where we started way back when, and like sort of building out some of our own infrastructure to replace that on property that we now own. So
do you think that, the initial collective collaborative setup that you were able to take advantage of may have been one of the reasons you were able to get to a point now where you have more sort of individual ownership or determination to what you want your business to look like? I'm just curious, like, where that collective collaborative model really makes the most sense. And it sounds like maybe in the beginning stages of farmers that seems to be the most benefit.
I think for us beginning, Nate mentioned that we purchased a tractor and a small market van. We were able to make some of those investments because we could lease square footage within an existing vegetable wash pack barn. I mean, it was set up for that, as well as have, access to land and another barn for storage. And that definitely made us able to grow into a scale that was more sustainable and more what we wanted faster, I'd say.
Yeah. And also I think there was just starting out as young farmers, as we mentioned, we had this great sort of template, these great experiences that we could take from working with the Arnolds. But then also when we started here in Bodenham, we had neighbors who were literally farming, like, I want to say, like, we were sort of farming the same field and just had it divided up into different parcels, right? And so to have other folks who were growing also organic vegetables and who you could farm next to, I mean, I think it was a tremendous advantage, both in terms of borrowing equipment and tools, but also in terms of just watching what other people were doing and seeing how it worked, right? I mean, farming is this sort of, it's like this repetitive experiment that we all embark on like a seasonal basis, right? You sort of create your farm plan, you implement it, you see how it sort of goes in terms of weather and pests and what produces well and what doesn't, and then you sort of tweak it and you do it again. And we could do that on our own, but we could also watch what our neighbor was doing and another neighbor beyond them was doing and sort of see like, oh, that variety looks awesome, or that tool looks really interesting, or like really worked well, or that didn't. And so I think that was really helpful. And I mean, I'm sure, as you know, Claire, like in Maine, like farms are small and spread out. And so it felt fairly unique, not just to have, a farmer 2 towns away who you maybe thought did a great job, but rarely saw. But in our case, we had farmers who we were like farming literally within sight of, who we could sort of collaborate and learn from. So I think that was a fairly unique experience. I think what ultimately is challenging, right, is that where many of us start, in year 1 and year 2 is not necessarily where we either want to or need to get to in terms of the long-term sustainability of business and quality of life. And so that question is it, I think in our case, as different farms were growing, they sort of started at times to bump up against the just sort of either land-based or infrastructure needs for their businesses. And sometimes I know in a couple cases, their inability to like sort of expand beyond that sort of contributed to people reconsidering and either moving elsewhere or not farming or, so it's hard, it's like, it's on one hand, it's great when you have a bunch of 2 to 4 acre farms all farming together. But then when everyone is trying to become a slightly larger farm or more established farm, that transition is also a little tricky.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've always been really fascinated by that model. When I first moved back to Maine, over a decade ago, I was, your little sort of farm collective, was one of the first I wanted to visit and experience because I found it a really fascinating model. And it's so great to see how your business model and your family has grown over the years too. Within that, sort of the microcosm of that system. So, what I guess, would you, in retrospect, would you do that again now that you know what you know now, or would you just do it differently? I mean, I'm curious how much you feel that has really aided your success or where you are now.
Where we farm is such a spectacular spot. We have ideal soils for growing vegetables, and we're right on the shores of Merritt-Meeting Bay. So even not considering specifically the collective model or some of the constraints that, the opportunities and constraints that it has provided, it's such a special place to be living and working. It's hard to imagine wanting or finding something better, either to start out or to continue at our farm while we're farming. But one thing that struck me, and I think both of us, when we first started and moved here, is nobody knew us in Bodenham. Nate's from up near Bangor is where he grew up, but and I'm from Massachusetts, but nobody knew us specifically in this area. And people were so welcoming, like just so welcoming. All the other farms, not just our immediate neighbors, but Bodenham is pretty great to have lots of farms, even just down the road. And, now quite a few throughout the town. But the amount that people were willing to share information, not just equipment, but answer questions or, water a greenhouse. We had to go away one weekend our first year. And again, without really knowing people took care of our seedlings. And also I remember going to market, we were so like heads to the soil, like working all out our first year. And at market, some different people would be like, "Oh, you live in Bodenham, isn't it fabulous?" And I was like, "I think so." Like we haven't really gone out other than like asking to borrow tools or if someone could, do us a favor. Everyone seemed nice, but I didn't really know. And now, being more connected in the community, it is a really special place to live and work. So maybe that sort of answers your question.
Well, I mean, I think it's such a ideal location to be within 40 minutes of Portland, Maine, which is, pretty much an endless market for the most part, or at least a substantial one, we'll say. So having, having the proximity seems like a huge advantage too. So yeah.
I think even more important than the proximity to Portland is the proximity to Brunswick, which is even closer. We do all of our farmers markets are in Brunswick. We are lucky to get into those starting our first year. And it's a really fantastically supportive spot with great established markets. So we do sell some down in Portland, but Brunswick is really the focus of the majority of our sales. So that's worked out. Even shorter drive for us.
Yeah. Yeah, no, true. I know. I always forget about the sort of Brunswick area as well. So maybe if you could describe your marketing and how you've grown over time, how that's supported it. I'd love to hear just more of kind of the thought process you put into it. It sounds like you've been primarily farmers market based, which is an interesting model. And I'm curious how you've sort of moved through the growing pains of that and, some of the disadvantages of that model as well.
Let's see. So when we lived in New York City, I worked at farmers markets and I loved them. And when we looked to apprentice on a farm, one of the reasons we chose to work at Paul and Sandy's farm is because they were farmers market based. I think almost all of their sales at that time were through farmers markets. And so we knew that if we could find a farm in proximity to good farmers markets, then that would be our focus. And when we looked here at the soils and at the land and infrastructure, when we were first considering it, we visited the markets in Brunswick and they were already bustling. And we talked to a few of the vegetable vendors who were very welcoming and said, oh, yeah, it's great. I think there's room for more. And so our first year, we were able to get into Tuesday and Saturday markets in Brunswick. We chose, I think it was all on our choice. We chose to do our third market on Fridays in a different town because we thought maybe it wouldn't make sense to have all of our farmers markets in the same town and better to spread it out. But after our first year, we realized the other market was great, but it was a further drive. And we decided to switch to all Brunswick, which actually has been a great benefit to us, I think, to have really consistent customers who know they can always find our produce.
Yeah, I think, there's some reflection, right? Like, in retrospect, we were somewhat lucky at the time that we started, right? So we sort of started at this really sweet spot in the local farming, sort of development of local farming, local food, at least in this part of Maine, in the sense that there were some pretty good farmers markets that had developed and they had been going for several years. And so, like, I think in Brunswick, there was a market that was in sort of the downtown sort of green mall of Brunswick that had been going since the late 70s. And then there was one out Crystal Spring Farm on Saturdays that had started maybe 5 or 6 years before we started. So these markets were going, but there was still space for new vendors, new vegetable vendors in particular. There wasn't like a very long waiting list. And so it was this, for us, we were very lucky that we could step into those markets. They were busy, but we could start in right away. And then, yeah, I think in retrospect too, as Gabrielle mentioned, like, it felt a little nerve-wracking actually to be like, we're going to be all in on Brunswick and we're going to do 3 markets a week in Brunswick. And Brunswick, it's sort of funny because there's a lot of larger towns, Portland, for example, which do not have 3 farmers markets a week. They just have 2 or 1. And I think one of the things that we've sort of come to the conclusion over the years is that to some degree, like, if you have the right community, and I think Brunswick demographically and the greater area fits this, where you have people who are really a certainly subsection of the population that's really interested in local food and certainly has some of the disposable income necessary to be purchasing a lot of local food at farmers markets. To some degree, like 3 markets a week almost allows people who are inclined to shop almost wholly at the farmers market. So it shifts from, a once a week Saturday sort of shopping that's sort of fun, but doesn't necessarily provide all people's needs, to something that, at least for some customers, that they can do all the time and get a large percentage of their food needs. And so, it struck us when we started doing 3 markets a week, and this still happens, people would come to the market on Friday and they would, you would hear them talking to their husband or wife or their friend, and they'd be like, okay, let's just get the spinach. We'll get the lettuce tomorrow. And you started realizing that people would come on like a Friday and on a Saturday, or they would come on a Tuesday and a Saturday, and that certain abundance of markets, but it didn't actually cannibalize each other. It actually allowed people to shop more at the markets. And so to some degree, that has worked really well for us. And it's crazy, but a lot of our incremental growth over the years, which has gone from us growing 2.5 acres of vegetables in 2007 to growing like 25 acres of vegetables now, like, it has been, I mean, some of that has been in trying to like have the farm be profitable and support us and support more people. But a lot of it has also been in just responding to the market demand at the farmers markets that we started attending in 2007. And so, that the growth of those markets and the demand for local produce, certainly the adding on of a winter market, which we can talk more about. But that has been what has sustained the growth of the farm, not necessarily, that we never had a decision to be like, oh, we want to double our production. And so to do that, we're going to like find new markets and start doing, all these, whatever sort of going to Boston or Portland or anything. It was real. A lot of our growth has been just people kept wanting more and more produce in the community that we were already selling in and trying to meet that need.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that perspective because I think it seems like it can go one or two ways. Either there's sort of the scarcity mindset and you put all your eggs in one basket and expect to maximize sales on that one event, right? Or you have more opportunities for people to have that flexibility and loyalty, right? And there seems to be obvious benefits to both ways of doing it. And yeah, so I appreciate, and that's almost allowed this sort of organic growth of your business and your farm too. So yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I'm curious though, if you started with winter production or year-round production from the beginning, right? How do you think, or did you? Is that correct?
Mostly we grew some spinach.
I think we really started winter production in like 2009, like a couple years in.
Yeah, but early on. I guess my question is I'm curious how that has also influenced the growth of your business and your infrastructure and everything else as well. Because obviously you need more high tunnels, you need more winter-proof infrastructure to be able to accommodate all of that. And so I'm wondering how that's influenced the growth of your business too.
Considerably, I think. We really took off with winter growing when the winter market, farmers market in Brunswick was established. The first winter they started, we didn't join because we didn't have quite enough produce to provide for the winter season.
It must have been 2009.
Yeah,
the first winter. Yeah.
But then we knew we wanted to be a part of that. We, for better or for worse, we set up our farm right from the beginning and more or less continue with the idea of having as many vegetables as possible for as long as possible all year round, with the goal of sort of a one-stop shop for customers getting vegetables and herbs. And so having that winter side of things just continued with that goal. Has certainly focused a lot of our high tunnel. We sent you a list of all the various tunnels that we have built over the years, very much with the help of our employees.
Yeah. Well, can you describe the infrastructure layout a little bit just so that listeners are aware of the setup?
Sure. So yeah, I would say, the first part of the farm is that it's sort of, our farm is spread over like sort of 6 or 7 different fields in the neighborhood around Merrimack Bay. And so, but one of those fields, what we call Main Field, is where most of our at least permanent tunnel infrastructure is. And so we sort of joke sometimes that's like the Epcot Center of tunnels. Like there's all sorts of different tunnels and they all have different like little niches. And so we use, they range from, we have 3 or 4 sort of 3-season haygrove tunnels, which we're mostly using for summer crops, but also for some shoulder season, like sort of late fall greens. We have, I think about 5 different 200-foot caterpillar tunnels that we leave up year round, but we sort of primarily are growing, sort of, they're not as warm in the wintertime. And so they also tend to be like a shoulders, like late fall greens harvested in like December, early January. And then they pretty much get replanted in March for like early greens, sort of for harvest in April and May. And then we have a range of more permanent sort of Gothic shaped tunnels, including one that used to be 2 rolling tunnels that we eventually decided we were getting tired of rolling, and we joined them together and made them one permanent tunnel. So that's a whole other sort of topic, the sort of the rolling tunnel, the pros and cons. But we did that for a while, but now it's stationary. But yeah, so we have a range of, most of them are 30 feet wide, of varying lengths of sort of Gothic high tunnels, and those are the sort of core of our winter greens production. And then also sort of they transition earlier on to sort of early tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, cucumbers. So some of those are heated and some of them are unheated. So it's sort of mixed there. And so that's been, sort of building out that tunnel infrastructure has obviously been very important for winter growing, and also just as an organic grower, like sort of our ability to have and profitably grow tomatoes and, peppers and eggplants and a range of those sort of very valuable Maine season crops, and have them early and abundant at the farmers markets, and have them withstand really wet years like last year. That tunnel infrastructure has been really incredibly valuable. But the other part, which is I feel like less obvious and has also been like a bit of a learning process on the winter infrastructure, right, is like the storage crops. And so like storage and where to put all of that, those crops, and then also the wash pack side of things of like, it's one thing to go out on a sunny day in January in your high tunnel and pick spinach, but then you have to bring that spinach somewhere and you need to wash it and spin it and bag it. And that space also needs to be at least warm enough. And so I think, like a lot of farms, like that has been a process of going from it, in the early days, like very much like some very like basic infrastructure of like, hey, let's put a tarp in our wash station here and put a little space heater in and like breathe in the kerosene fumes as we're washing carrots. To something that is a little bit more workable in terms of heat and insulation, and likewise with a lot of the crop storage, like moving from initially some very basic like used shipping containers to then moving to better refrigerated storage for some of those crops. And actually part of our current plans to sort of be building a new wash pack barn is in part to really try and have just better functional sort of all season workspace, so and just recognizing that everything's a little harder in the winter in terms of infrastructure and in terms of like sort of keeping those spaces functional and comfortable, and that for our employees as much for ourselves, having sort of a space that's really a farm space that's really designed to be for season in terms of wash pack from the get-go will, I think, provide a lot, just an easier and more comfortable and ultimately more productive workspace than what we currently have. But yeah, those, I think those parts of them, we sort of almost like stumbled along to like one of those like slap your forehead moments of like, oh, wait, we have the high tunnel, but now we need a place to, wash and store things.
Hey, podcast listeners, we're going to pause for a moment to hear from one of our show sponsors. Today's episode of the Winter Growers Podcast is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seeding to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. Our same-day shipping can help keep your planting schedules on track when the unexpected happens. We're here to help you grow good food. Turning to Johnny's means you can plant high-quality, trial-proven varieties with confidence and know that our expert staff is ready to help with firsthand knowledge because we've grown them ourselves. This episode is also brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses. Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse investment. Visit rimmel.com today. All right, back to the show. I noticed you have your farm stand is in one of your greenhouses. So, there's a great multi-use of space. Was that intentional or did that happen by accident?
A little bit of both, maybe. We didn't have a farm stand before COVID began, but it was one of the, many late night discussions when it was unclear if our markets were going to be called off or what we could do or should do to try and figure out that maybe some sort of a self-serve farm stand made sense as an option, if not the only option. So we really cobbled that one together as fast as we could. And but we were able to build a high tunnel, and because the farm stand during the main season was so busy, as we sort of continued to have it evolve during that time, moving it into the greenhouse was kind of a no-brainer since we had the space and we could keep it heated, or at least heated enough to have it work and still be, still at the beginning-ish of COVID. So to have it be a big space that if more than one person came in, everyone could still feel hopefully comfortable shopping was important. And now it's just a really nice option. It's very, now that we have the systems down for it, it's pretty straightforward to manage that. And people really like it who come out. It's really nice for me. It has allowed a lot of flexibility for me personally when our kids were home to be able to sort of bop out with them and set it up or check on it or whatever. It's on a day like today, it's actually quite hot in there, of course. So there's some things about it that aren't ideal for putting produce out, but it's also, a beautiful, cheerful space to be in the middle of winter, which is.
Yeah. And you have, I saw that you have stand-up refrigerated cases for the greens and the things that need to be kept cool, correct?
Part of that sort of having everything available all the time. There's no way we could put out, we put everything out in baskets, but there's no way we could keep out our leafy greens for 10 hours in the greenhouse. It would be pretty sad. So all of our greens are in those display coolers.
But it works nice because that's one of our seedling greenhouses. And so, it's sort of, the farm stand still bounces out in like April. We relocate it out into sort of a covered area, one open but covered areas of the adjoining barn. And so it sort of does this rotation of, as seedling season starts getting busier and busier and we need that space, the farm stand moves outside and then it's out there all summer and into the fall. And then obviously as the fall starts to get cold in November, it bounces back into the greenhouse and we put up some holiday lights and it's sort of a festive spot. But I think it makes me reflect that like one of the, another thing that we sort of would never have thought about going into winter growing or winter selling, but has really sort of, I think in retrospect, been a lesson learned is just that like your retail space in the winter makes such a huge difference and more than, like sort of particularly in like a farmer's market or a farm stand. But I feel like one of the great things about our farmer's market in Brunswick for winter market is that it's just this amazing space where it's in this old mill building that overlooks the Androscoggin River with these huge windows. And somehow it has worked for a long time for the landlord of that building to just like have that space remain available for essentially a 1 day a week market in the winter. But I do think that it's sort of similar with the greenhouse, like having space in the winter that has abundant light and just physical space when you're asking people to come inside and shop is a real part of the equation. And I think that we've been lucky to have define those spaces as a market, and then also on the farm to like make that happen. And I think it's really makes a big difference in just, people's interest and willingness to come out into those spaces to shop in the wintertime.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the location is both a huge part of it, and unfortunately, there aren't always great spaces, but public spaces to host it, or they're difficult to maintain. So yeah, no, that mill space in Brunswick is beautiful, and it has those big, huge glass windows. So, like you said, the light comes in. No, it's great, and I love your system with migrating your farm stand, from the greenhouse out. It reminds me of, sort of if you keep chickens in the winter, we would have them in the greenhouse in the winter, and then they go out in the summer. You're just moving things around where they need to be. So no, that's great. It's really, it's neat to see, those, how you adapt your systems to meet both what you think your customers want and also what works for your farm. So
it's just nice that we didn't have to build any infrastructure specifically for it. So it's actually maximizing the value of existing space is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I agree. And let's see here. I'm curious. You maintain 10 year-round employees, 20 seasonal. Is that correct? That's a pretty impressive local employment for a farm. I'm curious how you've been able to manage that. Is that one of the more challenging parts of managing your farm? Of course, people always are. So
I think it can be maybe the most rewarding and the most challenging, depending on the given moment. We're incredibly lucky to have a core group of folks who work with us, who've worked for a really long time, for different numbers of years. But like the fellow Andy, who's our winter farm manager, he's managing sort of weekly day-to-day work. He started working with us 16 years ago, I think. So, or this will be something like that. And other folks who have worked for, 5+ years or longer, who really, they're amazing. They definitely understand most, if not all, of the ins and outs of the farm, can run systems that I'm certainly less familiar with now that I stepped back quite a bit when we had kids. And to be able to have them working year round just means they, stay in the groove, and we can always get and give feedback to change our farm in small and big ways to make things better, more efficient, or just nicer for everybody. And then, our farm employee numbers double or sometimes a bit more, depending on how many folks end up working part-time as opposed to full-time for the main season. And that can be great and also sometimes challenging.
I mean, I think the one important thing is having that space for winter employment, right, allows for some people to stay multiple years and then allows to have that experienced core that when the farm crew gets larger in the spring and summer, that there are people who have experience who can step into more leadership roles. So in the wintertime, like everyone who works here in the winter, like, people have different roles, but there's a lot of just like, we're all picking greens or we're all, washing and packing. And some of that, as you know, is like weather dependent. So if it's sunny and 30, like most people are out in the greenhouse. And if it's cloudy and 15, people are in the barn and a lot of what, Andy's figuring out in the wintertime in terms of management of the winter crew is just like really what the weather forecast is going to be and what different days allow for. But then as the farm starts getting busier in the spring, a lot of those experienced people start to sort of move into more defined sort of leadership roles. And so like Kristen will start sort of stepping in and being the seedling greenhouse manager, or, Emma will become more like the tomato and sort of greenhouse crop manager. And, we have people who step into like field sort of crop leader roles. And so there's sort of like And then as new people join, like they can be paired up with, depending on the needs of the day, those experienced people, so that it's not just Gabrielle and I having to give direction, and sort of train people, but it's sort of a more of this longer term core group of people. And obviously there's turnover in people, even amongst those more experienced people, not everyone who's worked here is working, worked 10 years or 15 years. People like sort of obviously move on, or sort of sometimes if there's opportunities and there's good, a good first year person, they can stay on and sort of take on more responsibility in a new role their second year or whatnot. But yeah, I think it was Andy who really he spurred some of our winter development, because I think he worked, I don't know if that was 2009. His first year he worked with us, like we couldn't employ him in the winter. And he went and he like shoveled snow for a landscaping company and like cleared sidewalks. And he came back in the spring and worked for us again at his second year. And he pretty much told us like, I'm not doing that again. Like I'm not gonna shovel snow. So either you figure out a way to like grow more stuff and have more work in the winter so that I can stay on, or like I can't work here like, year in and year out. And he said it very nicely, but like that I think really got us thinking about how growing the winter production and storage elements of the farm, would allow us to keep people who, particularly when we were starting out, I mean, all of our current employees, we also are also friends, but like Andy was a peer and like a good friend and, our same age. And so like sort of having that thought of like, how do we really keep someone who is not just valuable to the farm, but like we like, and sort of make a farm that can keep them going in the winter in a way that works for them. And so, yeah, that part of the equation has been a big part of sort of growing the winter side of the farm.
Yeah. I mean, of course, this is probably a whole nother topic of conversation, but how do small scale farms create the continuity of employment over the long term, right? I mean, there are limitations to how you can do that. So I'm curious, it sounds like Andy's been someone who's been committed, and that's been a huge part of that, right? And with a friendship that helps with the process. But otherwise, how do you do that? How do you offer growth and increase in wage and all of those things that, as you grow through a career, you're looking for? How do you offer that on a small scale farm?
Good question.
I think ultimately, right, it like you try and be the best employer that you can within your sort of capacity, both like time and monetarily, and offer, sort of opportunities, really try genuinely to meet people with where they are and like figure out how the farm can work for them too. But sometimes sometimes it just also depends on where people are at. And I think we have come to the conclusion, like, it's probably not realistic that we're going to have we don't have a farm where like everybody it's going to be a great match for everyone long term, right? Like sometimes it depends on where people are at with their life and if it works for them to stay sort of in the same, like there is a point where like, I feel like we can offer people 2 to 3 years of growth and development, and then they sort of need to fall into a role that works for them and they're really happy with. Or maybe they're ready after that 2 to 3 years to move on to either starting their own farm or doing something else. And I think we've had a lot of people in both categories, and we've had a few people who, it just has seemingly worked well for their life. That they like working here. They've come to the conclusion that, at least for now, they don't really want to go off and start their own farm. And being in sort of a certain role here is like good for them year in and year out. And then we've had people who have worked here for 2 or 3 years, and we've all collectively recognized that there's nothing new. I mean, you do start to bump up against, like, in our case, like what Nate and Gabrielle do. And like, they're just, there's only so many people who can squeeze into our into our office for winter crop planning and, write the the customer emails and whatnot. And so at some point, people, right, sometimes it's time for those folks to, they decide that they want to do something different or a different opportunity. And so I think, for us, it's a process of being sort of honest and open with that reality, right? Like you have to be, even if you really love someone, you also have to be like, who works for you. You have to be honest enough about what your farm is and what it can be and what it isn't and it can't be. And sometimes that's just an honest conversation of like, maybe there isn't a next step for them here. Or if they want to stay, it's in this role, but there's no other role. And so we just, I think, try and have those honest conversations and accept that there is sometimes a rotation that happens. And when someone good leaves, it's hard, but it also opens up a spot for maybe somebody who's new to step up and have their own chance at that, more, increased responsibility.
I think the only thing that comes to mind to add certainly is the financial realities of it, right? And that's part of sort of these honest conversations is like, definitely, if we could pay all of our employees more, they all deserve it. Everyone should make more money than they are. But there's limits to what our, what we can provide, what we can offer, and what we need to do or what we think we might need to do as a farm to bring in more money. So therefore we could offer increased wages at maybe an increased rate, or, is that possible? And, certainly as we think through those things, there's always that conversation, but, how to be more efficient, how to have less waste, what prices do we need to increase? Is that possible? What's the max there? But, how do we balance that with, still making sure our food is accessible to those that can't afford our farmers market prices? But how do we make sure that our food and any food and, general quality of life works for our employees? It's a tricky balance there.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think farms in particular have the odds stacked against them even more so than maybe some other small businesses from that perspective too, especially with the cost of food. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges with it. So the most important thing is that we are all trying to do our part to change a system that is, I think, somewhat broken from that perspective. Well, on that note, I think we should launch into our lightning round. So we've got the 10 questions that you selected. And are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. So first question, which is easy. Well, maybe not, but favorite crop to grow, cook, or eat?
My favorite crop to grow is garlic. I just love that everything happens sort of at a different time of year than most of the other produce that we grow. And same for cooking. I just think garlic is beautiful, every part of the plant. And eat. When we chatted about this beforehand, I said, oh, sweet peppers. I just love sweet peppers. And Nate said, really? What about strawberries? Because we grow strawberries. And I was like, oh, yeah. All right, you're right. Hands down, strawberries of all the crops we grow.
I mean, this is always like, choosing between your children, right? But I think I love growing. I think cauliflower I'm a big fan. It's just in terms of growing, it's just a really big, beautiful plant. It has these, deep greeny blue leaves. And then the head of the cauliflower just doesn't develop till the very end. And so it almost feels like you just like keep checking. There's nothing there yet, and there's nothing there. And then just like, it almost feels like instantaneous at the very end of the crop growth. All of a sudden there's like deep down and in the midst of those bottom of those like sort of big leaves, you start seeing the cauliflower head develop. And, particularly with, you have a purple cauliflower and orange cauliflower and white cauliflower, it's sort of such a, sort of beautiful phenomenon at the end.
Especially white cauliflower, because I mean, we're growing things in dirt, and how can something be that bright white, right?
Yeah, it's so vibrant. That and I don't know, for cooking, I think celery root, celeriac is like the sort of just hidden gem of something that sort of has this great, it's like on one hand, it's just like another root crop that you sort of amongst all the root crops that last all winter, and yet it feels like it adds so much to different dishes and sort of has its own very distinct sort of sweet flavor. And yeah, strawberries, it's hard to beat picking fresh strawberries in June right off the plant and just eating them. So yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, no, there's nothing better. I mean, I have so many memories as a kid just gorging myself on strawberries and, getting strawberry belly aches. So, yeah.
What made me better is, I think it was our first year or second year. So we were like totally maxed out and exhausted. And we had friends visiting and they brought a bowl of like melted chocolate to us in the strawberry field. So we proceeded to stop working and pick strawberries and dip them in chocolate. And that was like one of the best things ever.
That's true.
It can't get any more, farm to table than that, right? What gets you up in the morning?
They're early risers. Thankfully, less early than they used to be. They get me up.
The sunrise, both literally, but also, it is a beautiful moment on the farm, and I think as exhausting as being up early, particularly if you don't quite get as much sleep as you need, can be, just being out and about in an outdoor workspace at dawn is pretty invigorating. It's just I think one of the reasons that we do what we do.
What's the hardest part of farming?
I think for me, it's been particularly over the past 9 years, figuring out the balance between having kids, having family, and farming. And that balance has looked different than I envisioned it looking. Yeah, but that's okay. It's, it's just sort of figuring that
out. Yes, I agree wholeheartedly with that. I mean, the balance, the sort of trying to figure out those quality of life balances between something that is so all-consuming, both in terms of the time that it feels like it asks of you in terms of farming, but also just in terms of like your emotional investment, and then being able to like figure out how to make the time and the space to step away. And, again, we like, as farmers, we like live where we work, and that's an amazing thing. But it also means sometimes that you can't stop looking at the weedy carrots that haven't gotten weeded, and that, to figure out how to be able to sort of find that separation is not always easy.
Yeah. Boundaries, I tell you, they're hard no matter what. What's your favorite tool?
It's both my favorite and least favorite is my phone, honestly, which is kind of not that fun of an answer, but I use it so much. It's so useful in terms of communicating with Nate or other folks on the farm. And for my particular role to send out customer communications or something like that. It's very useful, and I enjoy taking photos around the farm, and I just use that. So that is a happy place for me.
For me, I think it's pallet forks. I think going into farming, I think it's never would have had the appreciation for just how much stuff and heavy stuff needs to always be moved around to different places. And you can focus on like what the tractor's doing in the field or like what's getting harvested, but just the material movement of things as well as crops. I sometimes I wish that we had like a tractor with forks like located strategically at each field and each like building and whatnot, because it always feels like that's the thing that we're logistically trying to coordinate the most around the farm, which is like, okay, where's the tractor with the forks, and how can it get over here to move this so that someone else doesn't have to?
What is your favorite smell and your least favorite smell on the farm?
My favorite smell, one of my favorite smells, I guess, is opening a new packet of carrot seeds right before you seed in the well-tilled bed. The smell of carrot seed, I think, it always surprises me because it's not like carrots. And I just love that so much. Yeah.
Celeriac in storage. So we do, in the bulk harvest time of year in the fall, we'll do these big bulk harvests. And it's always notable to me whenever we put the celeriac into like a cooler, and then the next day you go in and it just sort of smells like it has a very distinct, just sort of sweet smell. And I've just, come to appreciate that.
As you might notice, Nate loves celeriac, but really, if we're going to talk about produce smells in storage, the strawberries from the field,
it's true.
Filling our cooler is like the best smell ever. I mean, celeriac is fine, but least favorite smell.
Oh, so many.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking there's so many, rotting brassicas.
Yeah, rotting brassicas in the field.
Anything rotten,
rotting potatoes. I mean, there's always, as a farmer, you have that experience where you just like find a tote of rotting something that someone, usually us, has like forgotten or put in a corner, and it just got left. And then you just sort of like someone open, like, what is in here? And then it's just, rotting onions, potatoes, broccoli. It all has its,
This is a good past season for lots of rotting vegetables, unfortunately.
Yeah, a lot of moisture, right? How do you turn off farming, or can you? Do you
go on vacation, but then plan for vacation?
Yeah, I think honestly, leave the farm. It's like, I mean, we certainly in the midst of the growing season, we don't do it enough. And that's part of the, sometimes a challenge. But I think we've learned that particularly in the summertime, like if we can just, a 3-day weekend of getting off, or even a Sunday afternoon of like leaving the farm, even if it feels busy, just allows that space to like turn off the farming.
Do you have favorite places for vacation?
So many places. When we began farming, one of our goals was to always be able to travel every year. And we have been lucky enough to be able to do that every year, except for height of COVID. And so, exploring new places. Everywhere.
Yeah, I think since we've had kids, we've definitely been trying to do a little bit more beach vacation or something in the winter. So, we've been to Hawaii a couple times, and that's pretty, I think in terms of like a tropical place that also has great food and great like local farms and local food, like that is sort of has been, we've had a couple amazing trips there, and, gone to farmers markets and, had, ripe, pineapples and mangoes and whatnot. And so that has been pretty amazing. And I think in the summertime, just trying to like get out and go camping, and, some of the inland lakes up in the mountains of Maine are so beautiful. And so we've been going to a place called Lake Aziscahos for a number of summers. It's just like a 4-day weekend of like bring the kids and camp and be like out of, like there's no cell reception. So it's sort of like just, we like give the crew the lists and trust in their experience. And then we just leave and know that even if there's a problem, they can't reach us. And so that has been sort of this wonderful way to just completely turn off the farm for a period in the midst of the busy summers.
This year it'll be really spring, but we're going to Sicily as a family trip, and that I'm super excited for, with markets and food and just experience hanging out.
What do you love besides farming?
Traveling. I love living by the bay. So the bay every time of year, all year round, is so spectacular. We get to watch the sunrise over it. If we can make the time to go out paddleboarding or kayaking or swimming, we do a lot of swimming because it's such an achievable break. And the kids love it.
Yeah, that's the same for me. We're very lucky to live next to this amazing body of water and amazing ecosystem, and to sort of have that. I think to have a deeper appreciation for the seasonal patterns of that sort of amazing place has been quite quite amazing. Yeah.
What's one piece of advice you wish you had starting out, or something you wish you had done differently?
It would have been, and maybe I just didn't look into it more because I had a certain vision of what it was like to be a parent and farming, but it would have been nice to know that can take lots of forms. And if your baby, let's say, doesn't want to be carried, then, strap your baby on the back and do some farming probably won't happen, and that's okay. But yeah, I think for me, it would have been just sort of hearing of a wider range of how what people's experience has been becoming parents and farming or stopping farming or whatever the different options were. It would have been helpful.
I think we knew it in a way, but we didn't really understand the importance of the quality of the farmland that you step onto. I think that we focus a lot on the idea that you can build a healthy soil. And while that is deeply true, I think that there's still geological realities of any farm soil or any soil that you step onto that just dictates what you can and can't do. And I think the appreciation for just that, certain farm soils are better for some things than others, and to really try and fully understand and embrace that and recognize that it can be limiting, and you have to work within the limits of what geology provides and not fight it. And I think that we've been really lucky, but to some degree, I don't think we were lucky in the sense that we didn't fully appreciate how good we had it until we started farming.
Although we did a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry. I feel like our first year, hands in the dirt, I was like, oh, I'm not scraping my fingers against any rocks. We can't move anywhere else. So we're lucky not to have.
Yeah, no, I love, my dad will tell a story about going to Iowa and just, being completely blown away by 3 feet of topsoil. You just throw a seed and something grows. And so I can appreciate that as well. How do you relate to that which is out of your control?
One thing that we try to do actually is preempt as much as we can. So talk through scenarios that haven't happened yet, but maybe could. At what point would we, pull the plastic off our greenhouses in the event of certain weather conditions? At what wind speed? Or it's amazing to be right by Merrymeeting Bay, but particularly this winter, we've seen at high tides, water has made our house into an island, which is exciting. And no doubt more to come on that front. So, okay, let's think a little bit more through even just the unpredictability of climate change, let's say. And, obviously we can't think through all those scenarios, but we try to sort of play out a bunch of different things before they happen.
Yeah. And I think to balance that is also to try and take yourself out of the moment and reflect on put your current moment in the context of your past experience farming. So I think, again, we feel like the farm season is long. There's we farm then multiple years. And so going back, I think often when things that are unpredictable happen around the farm, it can feel really stressful. And we need to look and recognize that within the greater context of a full season and then even multiple seasons, whatever event is or whatever failure is happening is, something that we can, that we will survive, and that the resiliency of a diversified farm will be greater than whatever specific uncontrollable issue is happening.
Yeah. No, good answer. And finally, how are you growing old farming?
Uh,
One achy joint at a time.
I think having year-round employees and just great employees means that we've been able to, not do quite as much physical work as we used to. I don't think there's any way we could have sustained. Well, I certainly couldn't have sustained it the way we were working the first few years of farming, so not always being the one to, or just not working as many hours out in the field or doing as much. That's hard on the body.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge in terms of, I think it is, farming is hard physical work. And I think we all sometimes, it's your body that starts telling you what you can't really fully do anymore, and trying to listen to that before it's the pain that's making you adjust, but to sort of hear those warning signs your body's giving you about how to do things a little bit differently. And I think again, part of maybe our growth as a farm has been trying, again, first with family balance, and now also with just sort of having older bodies, is figuring out how to have a farm that operates on a scale and with the appropriate tools that can be sustainable moving forward, through our 40s and 50s and hopefully into our 60s in different forms. And I think it's a natural. I think it's interesting as us farmers talk about things like scale and how many hours people were working and the workload and all those things, and or even just what our roles are. I think we all start in a phase where we want to and sort of celebrate being out in the field all the time. And sometimes it can be challenging to transition to a role where you're out in the field part of the time and in the office part of the time and driving around in the truck part of the time. But sometimes that transition also is maybe what, allows your body to adjust and survive, farming for many years. And so, that's also something we keep trying to figure out. And I'm sure we'll have to keep trying to figure that out for as long as we want to keep doing this.
I'm curious, do you have, or are you beginning to think about a succession plan?
No.
Sorry, I know that's a heavy one, but I hate to say it, but don't put it off too long.
Our children are young and thus far really have quite limited interest in the farm. So we're certainly not, banking on that. One of our children will take over the farm or something like that. But I think I'd say, maybe speaking for both of us, I hope that our farm can continue beyond when we're able to work. And if that's some form of one or multiple of our employees, or maybe our children, or then that'd be great. But we don't have any plan.
I think one thing that's really positive is, as much as, sometimes our bodies are more achy and creaky than they used to be, right? I think farming for us still fully engages us mentally. And so I think that neither of us have desire to, sort of transition the farm so that we can explore something fully different, or, partake on a different career path. And so I think part of it is trying to, on a long term, is going to be trying to think of how can we stay engaged in the, I do think one of the great benefits of farming is that, if you can figure out the physical part, you can stay engaged in it for a long time. And that experience really does build on itself, right? Just going through 10 seasons, 20 seasons, et cetera, you develop this deeper knowledge of your property, of the, sort of how things grow, of all the sort of minutia of biological interactions that are the basis of farming. Even if you may or may not know the exact science, behind it, like that knowledge, accumulated knowledge is real. And so I think for us, it's a question of like, how can we keep aging with the farm in a way that will allow us to sort of still be engaged. And at some point, yeah, there'll be a need to sort of figure out who steps in and starts making, more of those decisions, and maybe, we'll become like, farmer emeritus sort of thing on our own farm. But hopefully that's still a few years off. But yeah.
Well, good. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your thoughtfulness and experience. It's really great to connect with you, and especially, other Maine farmers. So there's a lot of similarities that I can relate to, especially not only just being a Mainer, but just being, I don't know, just maybe similar generation, similar age group. So yeah. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And wishing you a very bountiful 2024.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Claire. I appreciate it.
Today's show was produced by me, Clara Coleman, with support from No Till Growers. Special thank you to Willie Breeding for the theme music. Thank you to the patrons at patreon.com/no-till growers for helping to make this show possible. Thank you all for listening.